Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon, episode 53, the Battle of Vimeiro, and the controversial Convention of Cintra. We have a very special guest because it is the anniversary of the Battle of Vimeiro, and we have our good friend Marcus Cribb joining once again. Hello, Marcus.
Hello, and hello everyone. Thanks again for having me back.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love your intro voice. It's way better than mine, I must say.
I don't agree. I think we're introing up on each other. It's great. We're on our roll.
We're raising each other's game. I like it.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're talking about a battle. We just touched on the Battle of Rolica or Rolisa a few days ago, and this is like part two of that battle, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it really does follow on very quickly from Relitha, or apologies always for my terrible Portuguese pronunciation. But it does follow on very quickly, just 4 days later. And it's on the same campaign, but it's actually quite a bigger scale of battle.
Right.
Relitha was the first kind of pitched battle victory for the British. Wellesley, who becomes Wellington, goes on the attack up several hills. Vimeiro is very different in style of and size as well.
Okay. Yeah, and we were talking earlier before we came on, and we'll jump into the battle in just a minute, but the almost rarely is the aftermath of a battle more interesting than this one, don't you think?
Yeah, this one gets very controversial with the Convention of Cintra. We will definitely touch on in depth at the end, but it defines it quite different points here, and it's going to be one of those ones that we often find Wellesley Wellington. He has some fantastic victories, and he's always nearly like frustrated at the last moment that something happens that he doesn't roll forwards and is able to have that total victory. And
Right.
we've already been recording a few of these battle ones, and Salamanca being one of them.
Yep.
And he's just got that French rearguard action, and Vittoria we've talked about before, and there's some of the looting and bits like that. So this is another case that, and it's a bit more complicated, this one, but he doesn't get his total victory that he needs, and it's one of the reasons that the Peninsula War does drag on for quite a while.
Indeed. Well, just to give my audience some background, the battle occurred August 21st, 1808. Vimeiro, I believe, is along the coastline of Portugal, correct?
Yeah, it's actually very close to the coast. The sea, the shoreline is basically a stone's throw away. And the background to this is after, almost during and after Battle of Retha, the British reinforcements are coming ashore. So the Royal Navy and transport ships have brought the army down from England and Ireland, and they're rowing ashore from those warships and transport ships. And there's actually a few cases that some of the ships are, the boats, are knocked over into the surf, and there's a few drowning. But they're kind of arriving, and it's really bolstering an expeditionary force into a proper army now, pushing up to about 15,000 men.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side, we have one of Napoleon's best friends and oldest military buddies, General Junot, who's gathered about 14,000 French for this battle.
Yeah, so just a few less than the British, though, but again, quite comparable armies. They're similar in that ballpark figure, and General Junot, capable commander. He's been in the field of Portugal for a little while now, since he's marched into Lisbon, and it's quite comparable here. And having the sea nearby does start to change a few things, because Wellesley's now not able to get the initiative and go on the attack. He's got to defend that because more troops are coming in.
Right. And just some background, as you know, he's unquestionably brave. He's fought with Napoleon in Italy and Egypt. He's sustained several head wounds, so he's been at the front lines quite a bit. He's no tactical genius like Davout or Soult. He's more of a slugger like a Ney or a Oudinot. Just kind of march up, put him in column and launch him against the British.
Yeah, we see that now. Basically, there's a lot of columns of attack coming, and Wellesley's actually got something hanging over his head as a point of interest, that his his replacement has actually arrived that day. Sir Harry Burrard. And he's on HMS Brazen, sitting out there on the sea, as I was saying. It's really nearby, and he's staying there on basically in the captain's cabin because it's comfortable. And he's agreed that he's actually not going to replace Wellesley until the 22nd of August. So as the battle's forming, Wellesley knows that he's got 1 day left in the top job.
Right. And on the other side, I was reading the French marched all night just to get to the battlefield. So they're already probably tired. I know Junot is allegedly drunk, and his attacks kind of show that. They're kind of sloppily coordinated. But yeah, let's jump into the battle. So I want to talk about, and it's very big in Napoleonic warfare, skirmishing and skirmishers. Can you kind of talk to us about what that is and why that's important?
Absolutely, happily to. Skirmishers, they'll break down into kind of 3 types as well. So you will have regiments of light troops, which in turn break down into 2 for the British and kind of 1 for the French and their allies. So you will have light infantry regiments, which are not actually a brand new thing. Many people think they are, and it doesn't just come from the American Revolution. It has been developed over time. It's always been tried and tested, and then kind of has a peak with certain armies, and then dives back down. But we certainly see some nations, especially some of the Germanic nations, keep a good amount of them. They can be there in a battalion strength or line regiments. And then 1 company of them. So for the British, that's 1 in 10 companies. And for the French, it changes, but it's typically 1 in 6 companies are then designated as light troops. And then you also have your grenadiers as well. So those light troops, they're trained to have a little bit more initiative. Yeah, so they were typically thought to be a bit shorter. And actually, the archive records have shown it's on average true, about an inch. But it's not a massive difference. The main thing is that actually they were picked for a level of intelligence as well, and that led to independent thinking. So they were trained to think for themselves, which is not typical, as you know.
Right. So it was kind of like a shoot and scoot. There was no lines of firing lines. They were kind of moving around, taking shots where they could.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is they were trained mostly to work in pairs or work down to pairs. They could fight in line like normal troops. They could work in a squad or a detail that's smaller, and those whole squads can move and cover each other. Or they could be one's firing and one's reloading and moving, which is actually very similar to modern day NATO tactics.
Right.
And that works well because then hopefully whoever you're fighting against, one of them's ducking and stuff like that, and the other one you can have an effect. You can move, you can shoot.
And I was reading about it. There's a great quote that I want to get in here, and it said, quote, to counter the French skirmishers, Brigadier General Fane detached 4 companies of riflemen, the 60th Regiment of Foot and the 95th Rifles. These outnumbered and outfought the French skirmishers, who fell back to the sides of the brigade column. Without their skirmishers in front of them, the French column blundered into the 945 men of the 50th Regiment at 100 yards or 91 meters. The British formed in a 2-deep line and opened fire. So I think usually when the French were countering, they were attacking the Prussians or Russians who kind of just stood in line and took it. I think the British were able to see off the skirmishers and get to the main part of the French army.
Yeah, and that's what happens here. So the French are actually very good at skirmishing, and they actually tend to use more troops than the British and put out a mass amount. And then you end up with a battle within a battle with the skirmishers, as if the British are defending a position and the French are coming on, the French skirmishers coming out. The British, it's sometimes depicted as a really loose, wavy line, but they'll be out there. They'll be trying to get round because that has a massive effect. If they can get round the back or push forwards or push back. So you end up with a prequel to the main fighting. And one of the depictions I've best seen written was about the French column coming on with an angry swarm of bees around them, and that's the French skirmishers. What happens here is the British are able to force their skirmishers back. So then they're firing against the main body of the column, which instantly starts to cause disruption. You've got your officers and your NCOs at the front and the sides. If they're starting to be wounded and killed, then they've got less control over the body of men. And also, it's things like morale's going to be affected because the column's being taking casualties.
Right. And I think another interesting aspect that I wanted to mention is both commanders wanted to fight this battle as soon as possible because Junot was worried about the British linking up with Sir John Moore's army. And I think Wellington was worried about this Berard guy taking over his, like you said, he's being replaced. So I think they were both kind of in a rush to get this battle on.
Yeah, there's a time element to this. Junot's met up with a secondary force here, and under General Delaborde, who was at Reletha.
Right.
And Wellington is going to get replaced. He's only got this day, but he is waiting. He's not actually gone out and fought this battle. He's found a good position, and it's two long ridges, and both those ridges have got loads of walls and vineyards on them, so it will break up that French attacking column.
Yeah. Let's talk about kind of what happens here. So, looks like it's just the attacking column, as usual, marching against the British line, and they're just beaten back, from what I can tell.
Yeah, the shortest version of the answer, yes, that's absolutely what happens. They do. The French come on. They come on in column, and as you said, Junot's pushed them overnight, and they're getting quite tired. And the British skirmishers have quite an effect upon that as they go in. However, there's multiple columns of attack as they're coming up. It's not just the one. The British skirmishers have that, and then they pull all the way back in. Actually, some of the British positions, such as the 97th Queen's German Regiment and the 52nd Light Infantry, actually fall out onto the French flanks. So then they're having that effect there of firing onto multiple sides of the French attacking columns as they're coming in. And actually, this is followed up onto like Thomière's column with 50th Regiment coming afoot. And actually, men like General Delaborde are actually wounded at this point. So this is just actually the first of a few attacks, but Junot's separated his army out into multiple columns, and the first one's going in really under Delaborde, and that's pushed back.
Yeah, and then I think Junot is either frustrated or, like I said before, drunk, and he just looks like sending in troops. It's like he's sending in reserves, and Wellington still has a reserve that he hasn't even used yet. So I think that kind of says it all. Like Junot's just throwing men against the wall and hoping they'll break through.
Yeah, I mean, I think Junot's not had the experience of pushing against British troops, so he's expecting what happens. Many armies is the French are very good with their columns and their élan, their spirits, and they come in with the pas de charge and the rat-a-tat-tat and everyone chanting, and that body of men forces their way up, and that's not happening. And yeah, there's certainly notes of Junot's frustration.
Right. Yeah, just an interesting battle.
It is, and he has to push in his reserves. So what he's done is he's actually grouped together lots of his grenadiers, and he's formed them up into regiments, and they're pushing now in. So he's committed them. So grenadiers are meant to be your tallest, toughest men, and he's holding them back, and they go in on a different ridge. The British reposition to meet the second attack. The skirmishers come in, and then the British artillery can fire down upon them. And what's worthy of note about Vimeiro is this is the first battle where shrapnel is fired.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about good old General Shrapnel here. This is he was a British officer, and he came up with, instead of just regular cannonball, it was like an exploding shell, correct?
Yeah, so they'd already had a few different versions of this, which was like canister, case shot. So what would happen is it would just have basically a hollow cannonball with loads of gunpowder in it, and it would blow up overhead. And that would just be, if you just thought of like ripping parts of the side of a tennis ball or something, just have big chunks of that flying.
Right.
And if you caught that would rip off limbs, body, heads, all sorts of nasty wounds. But it's only going to be in a certain number of like big chunks.
Right.
What shrapnel did is he managed to find the right thickness of that, where you could fill it with effectively a type of musket ball
Hmm.
and still get the right ratio of the outside being dense and not breaking, and still getting enough explosive in there.
Hmm.
And that kind of ratio, if you think of almost like the core of the planet, the kind of ratio of the magma and the shell casing and the little crust of the earth around us, that then actually led to very deathly like mathematics of a payload of musket balls.
Right.
And if it was fired downwards at the right angle, it then created a cone effect, like a overhead light or something that'd be shining down. And as that comes down, you want it to fire just at the right overhead, too far, and there'd just be musket balls flying off into the distance. If it was on the downward trajectory, it would give a cone of death going down towards, and very effective against a column where men are packed densely together.
Yeah, I just did an episode in General Flaw, and he was,
Yes.
I think it was Orthez. He was behind his line of troops, but a shrapnel shell burst. It went over the line, but it burst overhead, and the shard like went down into his shoulder from overhead.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing. I was just listening to your 4-hour one the other day, and yeah, it creates that kind of uncertainty that you're expecting shot to come in against your front, and then it's
Mhm.
suddenly off in the rear or off to the sides, or
Yeah.
it's basically ignoring a lot of cover. You hide behind a wall. Actually, it's coming down pretty much straight overhead. It's like a top secret thing. We don't actually give it to our allies initially,
Mhm.
and certainly the French don't have it. They've still got they've still got a case shot, so they will have overhead explosions and things, but it's not having that same that the British have got. So it's cutting edge technology in 1809.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And so the battle's kind of raging. I know there's a flanking attack by Kellerman that's kind of seen off. And where is Berard? Is he off of his boat yet? Is he making his way to the battlefield to take credit for this victory? Towards the
Yeah, not till a bit later,
okay.
but he's not actually involved in the fighting on this. There's a second attack that goes in. There's a third attack that goes in, and Wellesley's managing that. He once the third attack fails, he sends his cavalry, men like the 20th Light Dragoons.
Mhm.
And actually, it's one of the other few times, apart from at Waterloo and Salamanca, apparently he starts taking his hat off and waving and getting quite jubilant.
Mhm.
And what I love about this cavalry charge is he's got a really small detachment of the Lisbon Mounted Police are attached to his army, and they go in. And in my head, I just have like, do you remember Due South on TV
Yeah.
with the Mounties? I've just
Yeah.
got them in my head, the Canadian Mounties, just going for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they go in, they attack the French. They get counterattacked by the French dragoons, and then they manage to pull back in like with quite a daring escape.
Mhm.
Was the French really come in and hammer them. So there's in the middle of this all, you've got multiple attacks of columns, shrapnel now firing, skirmishers, but also cavalry on cavalry action. So this is not a big battle by all amounts, 15,000 men aside, give or take, but it's got all the elements of a kind of quite a classic Napoleonic battle here.
Right. Right. Well, let's talk casualties real quick because I do want to touch on the Convention of Cintra.
Mm.
On the French side, looks like it's about 2,000 killed, wounded, captured, and 13 cannons lost. And the British side is very light, isn't it?
Yeah, the British casualties, I think, it's about 700 killed, wounded, and captured. So in that, a lot less. I think
Yeah.
it's kind of caused the French end up with a fourth attack, and they come around a flank, and the British maneuver to get that. So they've seen off multiple columns by this point. So they are doing a defensive action, which gives a bit of an advantage. They can use the cover. Their cannon are actually very well positioned, firing down a gentle slope. So yeah, the French casualties are quite substantial, and as they force back, they leave quite a few cannons behind. So yeah, 13 cannon there as well.
Now, it could have been worse, right? I believe Berard calls a halt or something, or stops the pursuit, which I think
Yeah,
is
yeah,
madness.
effectively. Yeah, the Berard kind of arrives basically right at the end of the battle, and goes, okay, it's now my command. Thank you very much, Arthur, for fighting the battle.
Right.
Um, I'll take over now.
Right.
And that kind of, I've seen one of the quotes as being like muzzling Wellington, just as he wants to head up. He's got very light casualties.
Right.
As a point of note, I found that actually one of the Lisbon Mounted Police, a cadet, dies out of them all.
Oh,
Just to break down the casualties a bit.
yeah.
But Wellington gets pulled back at that moment, and this is his frustration that we see time and time again. I mentioned it about Salamanca and Vittoria, two of the big ones. Waterloo is a completely different kettle of fish because the casualties are very high. But he's kind of ready to go on, and Berard's like, "Well, I've just arrived properly. I'm now in command. I want to kind of take." And to be fair to him, he wants to take picture of the situation.
Yeah.
Fine, but the situation is follow on, release cavalry troops to that can double time, march forwards, and start capturing French units that are in disorganization. So
Yeah.
that doesn't happen, and
Yeah.
Berard, I think, should be a little bit berated for that. And actually, he is now replaced within 24 hours by Sir Hugh Dalrymple. So
Yeah.
it doesn't take long
But the
for a
Berard
big
one is
for 1, 2, 3 change.
the Berard one is I kind of understand. Like he hasn't been there all day, so maybe he's a little bit worried that the French have a reserve and they're walking into a trap. But if he wasn't there all day, so for him to show up, take command, and say, "Oh, we're not doing a pursuit," I just find that somewhat ludicrous. But yeah, and
Yeah,
then Dalrymple shows up, who takes over. It's just strange. I don't know what happened with this chain of command here.
No, I think it's the quick changeover. Wellesley, Berard, and Dalrymple, by having it in quick succession in like kind of 24 hours, 3 different commanders, it creates that uncertainty of not wanting to do anything too drastic if I was being kind to them. But I definitely think Berard and Dalrymple went down the wrong course of action.
Mm-hmm.
And then they, call the Convention of Cintra, if you want to segue into that nicely.
Yeah.
It takes a bit of a turn, doesn't it?
Yeah, let's talk about the diplomacy here and the peace treaty. The French are decisively beaten. There's no escape. So they enter into treating with the British, and they send General Kellerman, who's the son of the Marshal Kellerman, smart guy, very good cavalry leader. And who's he meeting with? The 3 generals?
He meets with 3 generals, but it's being led by Dalrymple here for the British.
Now, and I know this is very European, but I guess the language of negotiations or diplomacy is French, but they don't know that General Kellerman can also speak English, correct?
Yeah, so I think we end up with a strange moment here that Dalrymple to his subordinates, which includes a whole host, but includes Wellesley, includes Berard. They kind of take off to the side and they start talking openly in English, and Kellerman basically can just openly eavesdrop to them. And quite smart to him is he doesn't let on that he can speak English, and he had no reason to. So he just kind of sits there and be like, "Yeah, you have your quiet moment in the corner, but I'm basically just listening in to the whole conversation." And then the treaty that's written and agreed upon, even with Kellerman's inside knowledge, there is just unbelievably in favor with him. Almost a victory to the French.
Right. All right. Well, let's go over that because then we can talk about how ridiculous it is. So the French they surrender. They surrender their army, but they get to return to France with all of their loot, all of their equipment and guns, basically everything they came into Portugal with. Correct?
Yeah, but it gets worse. So not only are all the troops returning to France, not only are they taking all of the loot that they've stolen from the Portuguese, but they agree that the Royal Navy is going to transport them back to France.
Right. Without a parole of 1 year or anything like that.
No, yeah. So normally there's like an agreement that they won't fight for a year, or they might exchange some officers as a kind of an assurance there. But it's basically like, oh, we'll give you a taxi ride home. So
and I read that like within a week, those same soldiers were marching back into Spain.
Yeah, I think they basically land in the south of France. They're like given a good meal and a new pair of shoes probably, and head back over the Pyrenees.
That's just
There's a terrible moment as well where the French are marching onto Royal Navy ships and the Loyalist Italian Legion, I can't remember if we've covered them yet. So they are Portuguese troops who don't take part in this fighting. They were mostly up in the hills, being led by British officers, who they're some of the first troops to basically evacuate Portugal during Junot's invasion, head to Britain, armed and trained very quickly by the British, and headed into Portugal to lead a bit of an irregular warfare and kind of a bit of a resistance plus. They guard the port against the Portuguese. So it's Portuguese troops making sure the Portuguese don't start to lynch the French as they see the French marching, with knapsacks full of silver, paintings, stolen
Right.
items.
Right.
In my head, you can imagine someone saying like, "Well, that's my candlestick. I want it
Yeah.
back."
That's our gold and jewels that you're taking. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how just ridiculous it gets.
Yeah.
Convention of Cintra is a very poorly written document. So for those reasons, Dalrymple, Burrard, and Wellesley are recalled to Britain to explain the Convention of Cintra.
Yeah, and you make a good point in your blog on dukeofwellington.org. By the time, Burrard and Dalrymple were admonished for the Convention of Cintra, it would be too late for Wellington to help Sir John Moore and Corunna, which would cost them thousands of men and lives. It was too late for them to get back to Portugal and Spain to help Sir John Moore by that time.
Yeah, sadly so. The timeline, the journey to sail back to Britain, and obviously he had to explain themselves in London, meant that Corunna then, Sir John Moore was having to have his own independent operation effectively. What's quite telling though is all three men are admonished, actually quite surprisingly, but Burrard and Dalrymple never hold proper command again. They're given like local garrisons and honorary positions.
Right.
Whereas Sir Arthur Wellesley is turned back around in the spring of 1809 and heads back out to Portugal, which would then lead to the Porto campaign.
Right.
So, and then from the Porto campaign, you get Talavera, and from there, then you get him becoming, Wellington as such, Lord Wellington. So, they all are cleared on paper, but only one of them gets command again, and he, becomes the Duke of Wellington effectively from there. He doesn't head home. This is his one bit of actual, if it's not even rest and recuperation, but this is his one journey back home in the whole of the Peninsular War as well, as a point of note for Wellesley.
Right. And on the flip side, although Napoleon was probably furious that his undefeated soldiers lost another battle to the British, he was probably somewhat happy with this Convention of Cintra to get so much in return.
Yeah, and I would think he'd be probably a bit surprised.
Yeah. Well,
kind of pleased in a way, going, "Well, you've lost the battle, but I've got my army back, and yes, you've been pushed out of Portugal by this time, but now we've got troops in Spain. So when you march back into Spain, it frees me up to push troops further back into Portugal, which is what happens. There's now another invasion of Portugal under Soult."
right. And I mentioned it in my episode on General Foy, who fought at both Vimeiro and Corunna. It must have been mind-blowing to him. Like 5 months earlier, I'm on a ship being sent back to France because we had just lost. And then 5 months later, we're winning and pushing the English off at Corunna. Like it must have been, he probably couldn't believe it.
No, and I'd love to know what was going through those men's head for the French, kind of going, "We've been defeated, but actually we're being sent back to France. We're not going to a prison hulks, And worthy of note, talking about prisoners in the Napoleonic War, the officers had quite a nice lifestyle sometimes.
Right.
What happened is they were like paroled into a town within the home nation, France and Britain. So you see them going around. They had to report back to a certain house most evenings. Sometimes they could openly carry their swords. There was the chance to escape. They're given their word not to, but certain people of character did. But the men were put under quite hard labor. So in Britain, for example, a lot of the French, they actually dug out Portsmouth Harbour. So if any of you go to visit somewhere like HMS Victory in the whole dockyard, and you stand on the deck of like the nearby neighbour, HMS Warrior, and you look into Portsmouth, well, at the time it was just like a wide river. They sent thousands of French prisoners with a shovel and dug that harbour out. And then every evening they were put on like an old ship in really tight conditions. And so men are dying of like exhaustion, disease, malnutrition.
Yeah.
So it's not a nice fate, prisoners. Then you're not just going to sit out the war,
Right.
really.
Right. Or be returned in luxury like they were in the Convention of Cintra.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I don't know of any case where it's like that.
Getting back to Convention of Cintra, probably the worst peace treaty ever, or one of the worst that was ever put together, at least in British history.
Yeah, and I think actually it's got to be up there as like great military blunders. Actually, this is not a battle, but it's certainly a massive kind of. How can we go as far as defeats, or can we can just call it a massive mistake that
Yeah.
Britain's managed to do, and it was scorned by many, and it really baffles the mind as to what they were thinking. Was it just, oh, well, if we push the French back to France, we're getting rid of them quicker. We're being honourable gentlemen. I'm trying to think of the excuses they would have come up with, but
Yeah.
doesn't
Maybe
hold up.
Kellerman bluffed them that they had more troops in reserve that the British
Right.
didn't know about. Yeah. You wonder what the discussion was.
Yeah, it's one of those fly on the wall situations that you'd love to have.
Yeah, indeed. But yeah, Battle of Vimeiro, I think, is very interesting. The battle itself, the British held their line as they usually do, and saw the French off. And then the aftermath is just fascinating. I just wish we could, yeah, like you said, be a fly on the wall for those conversations.
Yeah, and my other one is because when I wrote this up as one of my original articles, I did say seeing them off in the same old fashion for the
Yep.
first time.
Yep.
Um, but actually, Wellesley has quite a dynamic. We simplified it because it's hard to do without a map, and we've said that with the podcast. it'd be great if everyone had a map in front of them. But
Right.
actually, he's quite dynamic. He does move units, especially like the third and the fourth waves of the column. So he's not just kind of sat on this ridge. It's a really good ridge to be on because of the walls and the vines of the vineyards. But he does actually face new angles and new attacks. So it's probably my biggest bugbear. Is I always say, well, Wellesley wasn't only a defensive general, but here he is a defensive general, but he does it really well, and
Right.
that's a good thing too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm always gonna fly that flag that actually being a good defensive general is a good thing.
Yeah.
But he's not only, and this is like we see the French columns coming on, we see the British. We've got the shrapnel now, we've got good skirmishes out, and it's many elements come together very well for Wellesley here. It is a well fought battle with just a bizarre aftermath, really.
Yeah. And anytime you inflict 3 times more casualties than you receive, I think you've run a pretty good battle.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
what's it? The aim of the war is, it's not to die for your country; it's to make the other guy die for his kind of situation.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. No, Battle of Vimeiro, very interesting, and not the last of the Peninsula War. It's more, yeah. I wonder if they had any idea, any of them, that it was going to be like a 5-year slog, for actually 6 years
Yeah,
to get through the peninsula.
yeah. So it kind of it rounds up a lot of the 1808 actions for the British until Sir John Moore comes in, and we start to see the Corunna campaign now.
Mhm.
And that's what it kind of leads to. It's almost the end for the British perspective. The Spanish perspective is actually very different now
Mhm.
for this stage, but it's the end of stage one for the British. Wellesley's gone out there, he's released Vimeiro, and then we start to head towards the Corunna campaign until he comes back and the Porto campaign, and then we see multiple campaigns year on year until 1814. But it does really kind of mark the end of the opening chapter in many ways. If we see it as quite a linear book, and it sets that piece of what's set to come, really.
Right. Right. Indeed. Well, I thank you for that overview, my friend. That was very interesting, and hopefully my listeners enjoyed it. But yeah, Battle of Vimeiro, and again, just one more plug. You are doing a tour of battlefields in Spain and Portugal in September, correct?
Yeah, in September. So if you're listening to this on the anniversary, there's not much time to book, but I think there's still a few places. So do check out on dukeofwellington.org the details of that. But it's being run by Classic Battlefield Tours, so get in contact with them, see if you can still get along. And Vimeiro and Relitha are two that we are going to be walking the ground. So you can stand in these walls and see the ridge and imagine Junot's troops, Kellerman's men, going up these steep ridges and shrapnel raining down upon them. And I will take you there.
Very interesting. Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. And yeah, hopefully some of my listeners can join you. That'd be really neat.
Yeah, well, they joined me at Waterloo, so
Right.
you never know.
That's right. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you for your time, Marcus. This was great. And yeah, appreciate everyone joining in and listening.
Thanks, everyone. And again, any questions, follow up, please throw them our way and we'll do our best.
Yeah, McCrib History on Twitter, correct?
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem, my friend. You have a good one.